Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today I just want to talk about raiding a little bit for the Burning Crusade and how we're going to manage it with our guild. And I'm open for suggestions, so if you have any ideas or you've been in a guild that, implements some systems that I haven't thought about or that I don't mention in here, then just let me know. I'm open for some suggestions, but this is what I'm thinking, as we start our raiding process. So I just want to go over really quick just some broad expectations here, some of the raid guidelines whenever we're in the raid themselves, and just how I expect it to sort of go. Loot systems, and I'll sort of pitch you the case for which system I think is really good. Again, I'm open for suggestions here, but let's go ahead and get in here. Now, I will say I did some research, and Karazhan, Gruul, and Magtheridon are all open on week 1, which is nuts. So we're definitely not going to touch Gruul or Mag on week 1, but I would really like to try to get at least 10 people together for Karazhan. Now, the leveling process, it depends on how you do it, but from everything that I've heard, it will probably take somewhere between 25 to 40 hours to get to level 70. It's a tall ask for working adults, so I know that's going to be difficult to do. So, just do the best you can. I think if we can at least get some people up there, we can pug and grab some extra people and at least give it a run. See if we can down a couple of bosses. If nothing else, it gives you reputation with the Violet Eye, which helps your gear progression a little bit. And we might be able to get a couple of pieces of loot. So I would like to try to do Karazhan week 1 if we can get enough people. And then obviously in week 2, we'll just sort of see how it goes. And, no one's guaranteed a raid spot right now. We just kind of have to see who is going to put in the time and the effort. And I mean, nothing personal if you can't. I know some people don't have time for raiding. It's very time consuming. We'll talk about that here in a second. So definitely no hard feelings. And we will need reserves, right? So there will be some days when people will miss, or we might need a different class for that raid. So there might be a raid where we need 4 tanks and we only have 2 or 3 tanks that are ready to go, so we'd have to pull someone else in. So it is very nice to have reserves. So if you can't meet a lot of these requirements or can't get on it fast enough, don't despair too much. We will probably be able to get you into raids at some point. And then once we get Karazhan pretty much on farm with the main crew and we're doing, Gruul and Magtheridon, and definitely when we get into tier 5, I would be happy to help out and run some Karazhan with other people with the reserves and things like that, so that you can get some extra gear, have some fun, and then just be ready to go, if we need to pull you in for later. So, and you never know. Some people might have to drop out. Their work schedule might change. Some people might underperform. It would have to be serious. If we're just not making a lot of progress and the numbers are just too low, there's a possibility we might have to switch some people out. I really obviously don't want to do that. But we'll just have to see how it goes. So anyways, those are kind of the expectations, and we will need reserves, and that's perfectly fine. You can run heroics and still have fun. We can run you through Karazhan, we can do battlegrounds, all that kind of stuff. But what I want to aim for is 9 to 1 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday. I think the weekend, from what I've heard from most people, is probably the best for people that have day jobs and have families. This should be enough time. I think you'll have Fridays if you want to do a date night with the wife and or the girlfriend or whatever, or just go hang out with the boys or whatever. You still have Fridays as far as like a weekend night goes, and then Saturday, by 9 you could still go out and eat dinner. You could still hang out with the kids or the boys, or go to the lake, or whatever you want to do on Saturday or Sunday. And then just from 9 to 1 is a good window. And I like a 4-hour window. This is bold, though. It's back when I ran TBC back in the day. I'm pretty sure we did 4 3s. So we did 12 hours. And it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So this, doing it in 8 hours, people are going to have to be on it. Like, you're really going to have to come prepared and get it done. Because it could take a while, especially once we start getting into tier 5, like Serpent Shrine Cavern and the Eye. That stuff's pretty hard. Definitely into tier 6, obviously. So we'll see how it goes. There's a possibility we might have to adjust the time a little bit, but I think this is nice. And I like 4-hour blocks because that's conveniently 2 flasks. So you get to fully use 2 flasks, not waste any of it. If we did like 3 hours or something like that, you'd end up using a flask and a half, which kind of feels bad when you have some left over. So I like a 4-hour block, and I think that's pretty good. And, you know, I know that Sunday people have to go to work in the morning the next day, but I think 1 a.m., that's still enough time, and it's just one night a week where if that's you, hopefully you can just kind of soldier through that. But that's what we're working on. So I'm open for other times, but this is pretty much what I would like, just because it's late enough where you could still do a lot of stuff during the day, but it's not so late that it'll throw off your sleep schedule if you're someone who has to get up in the morning. Okay, so we want progress at a reasonable pace. So if you haven't rated before, or you haven't rated in TBC, I'm just laying out some guidelines here for you for kind of what to expect in there. And it's important that you try to do these things because you're working as part of a team. And I know some people will say, well, I don't have that kind of gold, or I don't have that kind of time to do that. It's perfectly fine. Again, there's no judgment, but this is what needs to happen in order for the raids to get done in those 4-hour blocks, okay? Because TBC is not playing, especially early on when people are going to be weaker on the gear and stuff like that. You have to have these consumables, okay? And you have to try to get the best gear that you can get. I know all the content creators are just like, oh, Karazhan's a cakewalk. You could do this, you know, in white gear or something like that. It's really not. Like, yes, if you are, you know, someone who's been, you know, hardcore raiding on the private server community for the last 10 years, TBC, you know, and you're like a speedrunner and, you know, you're like world class at your class, then yes, sure, you can do it in weaker gear. But for most people, I'll guarantee you, Karazhan is going to take at least a little bit to do, especially if you're newer to raiding. Like, yes, it is easier than like Black Temple or something like that, but it's still not going to be a cakewalk for a lot of people, especially in lower level gear. So you need to come prepared, even though, you know, once again, a lot of the content creators, the people that have been on private servers, all that stuff are going to laugh at Karazhan. It's not going to be a joke for a lot of people. So that's like someone who, you know, you're expected to run whatever, a 7 or an 8 minute mile, and you're talking to like an Olympic athlete and they think that's a joke. They're like, LOL, like I can run it in 4 minutes. It's like, okay, but for like your average person, you know, running a 7-minute mile is like going to be challenging. That's going to be something you're going to have to work up to for people who aren't used to doing distance running and things like that. Okay, so what is time consuming about it? What's going to take a lot of time? Well, you need to get your pre-raid bis. And for a lot of classes, the, you know, pre-raid bis are going to be crafted gear, and that crafted gear is going to be expensive early on. So tailoring specifically, if you are a warlock or a mage or a priest or a druid, maybe shamans. I think shamans can get away with leatherworking. There's still going to be some craftable gear, but there's going to be a lot of classes that are going to be crafting that tailoring gear, and it's just going to be extremely expensive. One piece of that cloth, I expect to be minimum 100 gold, if not 200 gold for like the moon cloth or the shadow cloth or whatever. It's just going to be insanely expensive. And so it's going to be probably at least 5,000 gold to get the craftables to make that stuff. And that includes if you're going to get the white mend and the white hood. Those are slightly less important. They're very good. The 2-set or the spellfire, they're very, very good. But those are rare patterns, so early on there's not going to be many of them on the server, and people are going to charge you like 1 billion gold for it, and it takes primal nethers, I think, to make those. So primal nethers and primal mites, I believe. It might only be one of those, but those are like super expensive. But even just to get the 3-piece set, very, very expensive. So that's a lot of gold you're going to need for that. You're going to need to also get gems to put in your stuff. Gems are going to be very expensive. Now, you don't have to get like the absolute best gems. You can go down, you know, like one step early on. If it's not your absolute, you know, bis item, then you don't have to get the gems. I think if you have the tailoring set, I would get the premier gems because you're not going to replace those for a long time. But overall, you know, you need to have something in those sockets. If you have a socketed piece of gear, you need to put sockets in it. Then you're going to have to get the enchants. You should try to get everything enchanted. Again, you can get a second-hand enchant if it's not your bis or your pre-raid bis. But if it's a primetime item, you're going to have to get a primetime enchant on it, and that's very important as well. So all of that stuff is going to be pretty expensive just to get your gear gathered, to get it, you know, augmented and, you know, pimped out. Pretty much you need that because we're going to need all those stats early on. And then you have the raid itself and the consumables. So this is much more than most people expect. Now, this is less than Classic, and the economy is much more robust in TBC. There are just a lot more ways to make money with the dailies and all that stuff. So the prices on stuff are probably going to inflate a little bit, right? But I would say, in general, ballpark estimate, and it depends on the class and everything else that's going on, but it's probably going to be 250 to 300 gold per raid. Okay, so that means we're raiding 2 days a week. Expect to spend like 500 gold on consumables, most likely. And you might say, oh my god, how do you get to those numbers? Well, let's take a look here. Flask. 2 flasks per raid, a 4-hour raid. It's going to be just very conservative estimate, 150 gold. That's assuming you can get flasks for 75 gold. Now, again, especially, you know, kind of early on where everyone's going to be hurting for money, trying to get their pre-raid bits and all that stuff, you can, depending on the class, you might be able to get a second-rate flask. So, like, Flask of Supreme Power for range damage dealers, you can probably get that instead of the Flask of Death or whatever, the TBC one, because it'll give you 70 extra spell power instead of 80 extra spell power. So it's a little weaker, but it's still really good. Like, 70 extra spell power is way better than nothing. And those flasks might go for 75. I will tell you, they are on sale right now. There's a lot of those flasks that are on sale for under 50 gold. So with some of these things that are fire sale right now and people don't realize, those are still going to be good. The Flask of Supreme Power specifically is still going to be good in TBC, because the Flask of Death or whatever is going to be insanely expensive, probably at least 150 gold a pop. And it's a rare formula, so there's just not going to be a lot of it. And a lot of the, you know, mega sweaty speedrunning guilds are going to soak all those up. The people with, like, you know, 50,000 gold are going to buy those out. But you could try to plan ahead and see, like, what's good for your class, which kind of consumables do you need, and see if you can go ahead and stock up on the mats. Especially some of this old world stuff is going to be way, way more expensive when people stop farming it in Classic. I think. That's my theory on it. I'll give you a great example here. The oil, okay? The oil, wizard oil, and the mana oil are going to be the best oils in TBC. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that the TBC oil is going to be better. It's not. That wizard oil right now and the brilliant wizard oil and brilliant mana oil are the best. They just have better stats than the TBC oils. And you know, so that's something to consider. There are some on the auction house again right now. Now, I don't know. I'm not a prophet. I don't know exactly what that price is going to go to. Or if you're on a different server just watching this video for fun and you're not in the guild, you're welcome to join. Transfer over and join if you want. But just be aware of that. Just look at that and just see, are there some old world, like, you know, mats or recipes or consumables that you can get your hands on. Now, there aren't a lot that are like that. Most of the stuff in TBC is going to be better. But there are some, depending on your class, where some of the old world stuff could potentially be better. And it's fire sale right now on a lot of these things because people are just dumping them, getting rid of them because they don't realize that some of this stuff is still going to be good in TBC. So just keep an eye on that if you want to invest in the future. Something to think about. Now, I will say, with some classes, and healers are one of these, a lot of healers, it might be better to do 2 elixirs, right? So do Elixir of Healing Power and then Greater Mage Blood Elixir. Okay, and you might be able to get those cheaper. It might look like it's cheaper than flasks, and in theory, it could be. So maybe you can get each one of those elixirs, let's just say 15 gold for both. It's probably going to be more than that. It'd probably be 20 gold for one elixir and one Guardian elixir and one Battle elixir. They might be cheaper eventually, but let's just say it's 15 gold for each. And that would last you, you know, 1 hour each. Right, and so you might think, okay, 4-hour raid, 15 gold each, that'd only be 60 gold instead of 150. That's a deal. Yes, but if you die, you lose it. That's the thing with elixirs. If you die, the elixir drops off, and you have to drop another one. Right, so if we have 3 wipes, that is certainly going to happen when we're learning fights and cares, and 100%, I will guarantee you right now, when we get in there early, we're wiping 3 times. Okay, so if you do that, all of a sudden that 60 gold turns into 180 gold. And then that flask is a bargain. Okay? So think carefully. The elixirs are good if you're not going to wipe. If you have stuff on farm, or you're maybe a hunter or something who can fake death, or a rogue who can vanish. You know, some classes might be able to get away with not dying. But if you die, you lose the elixir. So just be very careful in thinking that elixirs are going to be cheaper than flasks, because they're probably not on progression where you're dying a lot. So especially if we die wipe 10 times on Karazhan, I think that's totally possible when we're first trying to run through it. People are learning the fights and blah blah blah. 10 is a conservative estimate. You wipe a lot when you're raiding. Okay, so if you're not ready to die a lot, that might be difficult for raiding. I'll tell you, on Mag Theridon, we're probably going to wipe at least 100 times before we kill him. It's probably going to be just 1 or 2 weeks of straight up dying before we get Mag Theridon. We might get it faster than that, depending on how geared we are and how well everybody focuses. But just keep in mind, one of the sweatiest, most hardcore guilds, I think it was Apes, did not clear Mag Theridon in a night. And they've been fighting that thing for years. Like, they know that fight in and out. They have the most sweaty, some of the most sweaty hardcore people. They did not kill it when it was on the beta. Now, I think they've nerfed it a little bit. But I'm serious. This stuff is not a joke. A lot of times in TBC, early on, when you don't have the gear. Is it a joke if you're in Sunwell gear? Yes, but early on, it's not. So just keep in mind that is going to be expensive. So it's going to be 150 on the flasks if you get the second-rate flasks that are cheaper. Mana oil, I'm saying you use 1.5 mana oils. So conservatively, I'm saying you could get those for 15 to 20 gold and use 1.5. They're probably going to go and be more expensive. Right now, again, Brilliant Wizard Oil, Brilliant Mana Oil are cheaper. They'll probably go up in price. There's a chance they could go down, but right now they're 15 gold each. The Mana Oil, I think, might even be 12, but they're probably going to go up. Food. So you want to eat food. Now, I think those do last for 30 minutes, but you lose the food if you die, so keep that in mind. Conservative estimate on the food, 25 gold for a 20 stack. It's probably going to be more than that early on. Now, oils do persist through death also, so that's something you can count on. And potions. Whatever your class is, you're drinking something. Okay? So, I just said maybe 2 per pull. And, Karazhan has 13 bosses or something in it. So that's if we, kill it in 2 attempts, wipe once and then kill it. That would be 26 pulls. It's going to be a lot more than that. So once again, these are super conservative numbers, especially when we're progressing through stuff and we're going to be dying a lot. So obviously, it's and these numbers on these are conservative. So it's totally possible week 1 is 400 gold, for the raid. So it takes a while, and then repairing your gear. I don't know. It depends on how nice your gear is. I don't remember repair costs exactly, but it's probably at least 25 gold. May not be quite that much. Again, if you're a rogue or a hunter and you can fake death or vanish or whatever, your repair bill is going to be less. And other classes might have other consumables. Maybe you don't do an oil. If you are a shaman, for example, and you have Wind Fury or whatever, you put Wind Fury on your weapon, you may not have to use an oil. So, some classes might have less. And then there's other things to consider. If you're a hunter, you might have to have a certain kind of ammo. You might have to have sharpening stones or something like that if you can put those on weapons. I don't know what all the consumables are. I'm just most familiar with warlocks and healers. So keep that in mind. Now, even if you're not using mana potions, there are offensive potions that are good too. So particularly destruction potions are very, very good on warlocks. It gives you a lot of extra AP or a lot of extra spell power. And critical strike chance for 15 seconds. You definitely want to use at least one of those a fight on Bloodlust, and ideally probably 2 of those if it's a 5-minute fight. Now, I'm not saying you have to pop every consumable possible on the Huntsman, right, in Karazhan. That should be a pretty easy fight, but on a lot of these fights you need to be using some consumables, especially if we've wiped on it a couple of times. Now, if we're trying it out and we know we're probably going to wipe, where we're trying to learn it or something, for the first pull or 2, okay, you can get away with maybe not having the pots, but the flask and the oil should be ticking all the time because those persist through death. Okay, so the bottom line, it is expensive to raid. That's how it goes. That's how it is. Every guild that raids does this. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm not going to be forcing people to do that other hardcore guilds would do. So other hardcore, they will have multiple champs leveled up to this, and they will switch people out. They'll say, hey, this fight is really bad for melee. Let's kick out all the melee and go get your ranged alts and get in here and do this. And they're expected to have their ranged alts pimped out, with pre-raid bis and all this other stuff. So they'll have multiple characters leveled up, ready to go, switching people out. They'll make a lot of people go leatherworking for drums. They'll make people go farm whatever that is, that fire plant thing that you can use. That's an extra consumable. They'll make people use dark runes. I didn't even mention dark runes here, but if you're a healer, dark runes are extremely good as well, especially on progression. They are very, very expensive. They're like 8 gold each right now. They might even go to more than that. You farm them out of Skullomance. I'll give you a tip. You can go get those. Just talk with me if you're a healer. I can tell you where you can farm those right now to be prepared for TBC. Basically, Ashara in the upper right, there are these camps of satyrs. There are 3 different sort of sets of satyrs, and you can go around and farm those, and they will give you rune cloth, fell cloth, and these demonic runes. The demonic runes count as dark runes. They're the same thing, you just can't trade them. But it's basically you sacrifice health in order to gain mana back. It's not on the same cooldown as potions. It's on the health stone cooldown. So you can actually use that as basically a second potion that's way more expensive. And you'll need that for some of these longer fights where you might be running out of mana. Especially if we can't get a freaking healing shaman. Like, healers are going to be in trouble if we don't have a healing shaman. We're not going to have mana tide totem. We're not going to have mana stream totem. We're going to be busting out the dark runes until we get a healing shaman. But yes, that's another thing that could be expensive. So this is just like baseline. You can go way more intense with some of the consumables, but I think this is the reasonable stuff to ask for most fights. So be ready to spend some gold. Okay, so what are raid guidelines in general here? And, if gold is an issue, just talk with me. There might be some things we can do. Like, I'm going alchemy. If you bring me the mats, I might be able to, craft you some of these things if I have the patterns for it and stuff like that at cost. If you're using my mats, I'm not sure if I can keep up if, 25 people are coming to me, want me to get all these mats. But we'll see. But I can craft some of these probably and get the cost a little bit lower, especially a flask, right? If the mats for the flask are only 20 or 30 gold and the flask is selling for 75, I can probably help you out. But anyways, and if you're a little short on gold, you're really busy one week or whatever, just talk with me and maybe we can talk about, a short-term loan or something like that if I have enough gold around, or otherwise we can maybe work something out. So just email me at thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com if you want to have that conversation. If you think you might be a little short on gold or you want some help here and there with certain things, we might be able to work something out. So just email me and let me know. But this is, once again, this is kind of par for the course. Pretty much any raid is going to expect this. This is bare minimum, I think, for any raid that's serious about progressing. But yeah, again, if it's going to be a problem or whatever, but you still want to be able to raid, just talk with me and, we can maybe find a way to make that work. Okay. So raid guidelines. So follow, guide etiquette, guild etiquette. So we don't have an official sort of thing with this, but just be friendly to people, just be careful, just think carefully before you talk to people. Just everybody's going to make mistakes at a certain point. Try not to be rude. Try not to say, hey, that was really idiotic that you stood in the fire. Don't do that. That type of stuff. Just think carefully and try to be considerate of other people. Try not to be, brusque. Just think carefully of how you're talking to people. I know, on the internet, it's difficult. Some people, that's just how they talk. They're just very frank and straightforward. And some regions around the U.S. or other places might be like that. Like the Northeast, is kind of known for being a little more just kind of frank and straightforward versus somewhere like the South or the Midwest or whatever. But just try to be friendly. Try to, be as understanding as possible when you're talking with other people and, try to run it through, me or one of the other people that are helping raid lead, if you have a problem with something that's going on or whatever, talk with us first instead of directly confronting other people. If you're like, hey, this is happening or whatever, especially if you're frustrated and you're not really sure how to say something in a polite way, whisper it to us, talk to us, we'll consider it. We'll be able to figure out a way to talk about an issue or deal with an issue potentially. So yeah, just try to be kind and polite, and if for some reason you think you can't do that, then whisper us and tell us what the problem is, and we'll figure out a way to talk to people and hopefully get something resolved. Okay, but we want to keep the drama to a minimum, and we want it to be a friendly, welcoming place. Like, that's the main thing. We want progress, but we do not want it to feel like a boot camp. We do not want people to feel anxious or intimidated or whatever. Okay. Okay, so you need to show up to a lot of raids, especially if you're a tank or a healer. You really cannot miss a lot of raids because it's gonna put everybody behind. We'll have to pug people for that if that happens. We'll talk about more of that here in a second, but try to have really high attendance. We will do our best to have some reserves and treat our reserves well, treat them right, because we're gonna need them. And but you need to have high attendance. If you're going to be missing, one day a week, one day every 2 weeks, that's too much, right? So if you have a really erratic schedule, again, a reserve might be a great place for you. If you want to try to get it on some raids sometimes, but you can't make it all the time, would be, a reserve type of situation, which is fine. But we need the people that are like the full-time raiders to, show up. Reasonable progress on gear, we talked about that. So if it comes down to it, if we have a lot of people that are just wanting to raid, that are, level 70 and they're ready to go, we're probably going to prioritize people that have the best gear a lot of times. I mean, some of it could be attendance, some of it could be, attitude related or skill related with how they're playing, but a lot of it is going to come down to gear. If someone's wearing greens and someone else is wearing like full on, spell strike, shadow weave gear, or whatever it is, the shadow crafted gear, we're going with the guy that's got the 1300 spell power versus the guy that's got 400, right? I mean, that's only fair, that's only right, because if we do it any other way, then we're holding the guild back to some extent, right? So it's making it more difficult for everybody else. So that's really the fair way to kind of do it, especially early on. And I mentioned that you should have enchants, you should have runes, all that kind of stuff, or gems. Is everything you can to improve your gear, everything you can to get those numbers up. Consumables, talked about that. Research your spec and try to play reasonably well. So I have a couple of resources here that I think will help out. So that comes in with be willing to learn, be willing to improve. So we might have some commentary for you. We'll try to be positive and uplifting, but we might say, hey, we're going to need you to try to decurse and pay attention to that a little bit more, or dispel this. We really need you to dispel this. Can you do that for us, right? So we're going to try to be, friendly. I'm a teacher. I try to have effective communication at all times. But just be willing to listen to people. Don't take it personally, especially if people are talking friendly to you in a suggestive manner and stuff like that, and they're running a lot of the stuff through us. Then just listen. We're doing it in the best interest of everybody, including you, if we're talking to you. Okay, so we're looking out for you. We're not trying to attack people. We're just trying to help everyone have a good time, get these bosses down. That's the goal. Okay, so it's never a personal attack. It's never to make people look dumb. If I do have some kind of critique, and this is another thing I'll say: try not to do it on a public forum. Okay, if you have something to say to somebody, first of all, if it is a critique, try to run it through us, through a leader, because again, we'll probably have a little bit more authority, and we will also be able to hopefully phrase it in such a way that it will be received well. But if you do have to say something, whisper it to people. Okay, do not say stuff over Discord like, hey Jim, don't stand in that fire, because that makes people feel defensive. It's calling them out. It can embarrass people, on Discord. That's just building drama. You don't need to do that. Don't type it in guild chat. Okay, if you need to say something directly to somebody for whatever reason, whisper it to them. Say, hey, can I have wisdom? Or, hey, Could you help dispel this off of me? I had this curse on me for like 30 seconds and it was killing my DPS. If you need to do that, whisper it to people, okay? That way we're not bringing out any sort of critique in public as much as possible, okay? And it's usually received better if it's personal, if it's whispered, okay? Rather than calling somebody out in front of everybody, okay? We don't want to do that. Again, we don't want a boot camp mentality. We don't want intimidation factors. You know, we don't want it to feel like a hostile place, okay? And then you have to have DBM. We'll talk about this in another video. That's deadly boss mods. You can use big wigs or something else, but something that's telling you timers when stuff is coming up for bosses. You have to have that. Some fights just you just will not be able to succeed in the fight if you don't have if you don't have that. So you have to have that. You have to have a threat meter. You do not want to pull threat. So that's a bare minimum. If you want to have a damage meter, all that other stuff, you can. We'll have it as leaders. We'll be taking that, you know, information into account and sort of thinking about our strategy. But you need to have a threat meter at least, and you need to have Discord. You don't have to talk on Discord necessarily, okay? But you need to be able to listen on Discord. So it's okay if you don't have a mic. It's okay if you're really shy and you don't like to talk. That's fine, you know, unless you're a leader of a class or something. And if you're not comfortable with that, we can find somebody else, okay? So you don't have to talk. If you don't want to, if you're shy, you don't have a mic or whatever, but you need to be able to listen. You need to be able to hear what we're saying. You need to be able to listen to the strategy and any sort of feedback that we have. So have Discord installed. And again, I can walk you through this technology. All of these are free. If you're not familiar with the add-ons, all of these are free. Okay. Final thing that I want to talk about is the loot system. So, there are a few different loot systems. First of all, you just have the, you know, / roll or whatever, kind of the old school, what you do in a dungeon. I don't think that's a very good idea. I mean, maybe like early on or something like that, you can do that, but you kind of can run into the problem where people can get multiple pieces of gear, and that can feel kind of bad, because everybody's going to want some gear kind of coming in. So, you know, rolling is not completely terrible, but you don't have any control over who's getting what gear, and you could just get outrolled, and people in theory could get multiple pieces of gear, and no, that can be kind of bad. Another one that I think is similarly bad is doing loot council for everything, which is what you'll hear like Master Looter, which is basically we would get together, you know, maybe a leader from each class and I would all like talk in a separate room, and we would decide who's going to get which piece of loot based on what we think is best for the guild, kind of behind closed doors, right? So I don't like that either, because that can feel very political. It's like, oh, well, he's just giving it to this other guy because they're friends. They run a lot of dungeons together. He knows this person in real life, or, you know, just whatever, right? Like that can start drama, especially around really high-end items that are going to be heavily contested, right? Like tier gear or the Dagger Spine Trophy from Gruul's Lair, all that kind of stuff. So I really don't like loot council, even if it is more efficient in theory. Like we can give that over to people. Like we could say, hey, you know, this hunter is outperforming all the other hunters by 10%, and he's here at literally every single raid, and he does all this really good stuff, so therefore he should get the Dagger Spine Trophy over this other hunter who does less damage, who has missed a couple of raids, and all that kind of stuff. Even though it might make logical sense to give it to the person who performs really well, it's just not going to sit very well politically with everybody, because it's going to feel like favoritism, and you're just not going to know, even if it is the best. So I think it's not worth squeezing a little bit more of efficiency out of a situation at the cost of the vibe, right? At the cost of the spirit of the guild, of the unity, and stuff like that I hope we'll be able to foster. So I just don't think it's very good politically, even if it is good, you know, mathematically, to do things in certain ways. So that's why I don't really like loot council for most things. We might have to do that if there are like some interesting situations, but for the most part, I really don't like it. Okay, so that leaves us with really two options. And the first one, I guess I'll talk about, is the one that I don't like that much. It's like, okay, it's better than the two I just mentioned, but I don't think it's ideal. So the first one is DKP. So what this means is these are Dragon Killer points. And basically that's just kind of slang for a currency that a guild comes up with that people earn by attending raids, killing bosses, having all their consumables. You can make it anything that you want, but you earn points, or like you could even make it like gold that you put it, that you donate to the bank, or materials or something could give you DKP. But it's usually mostly like showing up to raids and killing bosses. You get DKP. So you basically get a currency that you can spend to buy items whenever they drop. So if you have 300 DKP and you want to buy an item that is 300 DKP, you could buy it. Now you could bid on stuff as well, in theory, so you could just bid all of your DKP. Maybe it's 300 base, you get into a bid war with somebody else. So it's just basically like money, right? And you just bid on items, and that's it. Now this is a nice system because it encourages loyalty and attendance. So people want to show up, they want to stick with your guild because they already have earned a lot of DKP, and they want to be able to spend it. So that's nice. So it helps your veterans who have been there a while, who have, cleared this raid. They've killed Gruul 50 times, and by God, the Dagger Spine trophy drops that 50th time, and that person who's been there 50 times should get it, over the person who literally just showed up that night, who's a new recruit, and they've killed it once, and Dagger Spine drops, okay? So I know that logically that feels good. It's like, okay, they've been there a long time. They deserve it, right? Like, that seems like a good thing, and for some guilds that can be good. If you have a really tight-knit group of people who have been raiding for years and years in vanilla WoW or on private servers or whatever, if they're really close and you already have an entire crew of people, then that can be a good system. But my problems I've experienced, this is what my guild ran back in the day in TBC, and we got all the way up to Black Temple, and then I ended up leaving. It was a great guild. It was just for real life stuff at the time. But a lot of people will hoard DKP for their best items, and they won't bid on items. So a lot of stuff gets disenchanted that could have potentially been an upgrade for somebody, at least a little bit of an upgrade. So for example, if you're a hunter and maybe there's this like pretty decent, I don't know, belt or something that drops for you off of Karazhan, you may not spend your DKP because you might be just saving it for Dagger Spine trophy. You're like, well, you know what? I've got an okay belt. Like, yes, this is an upgrade, but Dagger Spine is the item. That's what I really want. So you just save up all of your DKP for that, and then nobody gets that belt, and it gets disenchanted, and the guild loses because there could have been an upgrade. It could have been better. It could have improved the stats for the guild, but everybody's hoarding it, right? And there are a lot of items like that, right? It could be the Dagger Spine trophy. It could be the Tsunami Talisman for, I think that's like, I don't remember everyone. That's for like hunters or something. You have the Lightning Capacitator, usually for elemental shamans, could also be for mages, boomkins. So there's a lot of stuff that are really like flagship strong items, and everyone just hoards and will turn down side grades. So, and then it just gets disenchanted. So I don't like that, and that's what it'll do. And I've heard other people say, oh, well, there's a new different DKP where it decays over time if you don't use it, so you're encouraged to use it. It's like, okay, well, everyone's going to hoard the maximum amount for whatever their thing is, and if they have some extra, they might get a couple of items on the side. But it's the same drill. Everyone's just going to hoard shit, and a lot of stuff's going to get disenchanted. And it's just going to make the gearing up process take a lot longer than it needs to, because everyone's just going to hoard and spend on what they perceive to be the best stuff. So I don't like that. I don't like the hoarding aspect. Another thing that's really bad is this screws over any pugs or reserves that we have, right? And we need reserves. We have to have reserves. People are going to miss. This happened to me all the time when I was trying to raid lead in Warlords of Draenor. Just you could not keep reserves because everyone wanted to be a starter, and even if you didn't do DKP, even if you had something else going on, it was just so hard to keep reserves. But the number one thing that just killed so many little guilds I was a part of that were trying to get raiding is people just missing attendance, right? We'd have 20 people, a couple of people miss, and then all of a sudden we couldn't do a raid. And a lot of it was people just did not want to pug. They're like, oh, we don't want to pug somebody for this mythic. I'm like, okay, the choice is pug 2 people or don't do it. And a lot of people would just say, just don't do the raid that night. I think that's unacceptable, because then everybody misses out on a chance on loot. By the same token, you want to be fair, right, to the reserves and to the pugs. The people who are coming in that have been reserves, they've been loyal the whole time. They've been happily chilling out, chatting with people, you know, just being good guildies. And they get their chance to come in because somebody missed. You know, if they don't get a shot at any items because everybody else has like 5 billion DKP, and they're just like, well, why am I going to go to this like gruel run when there's no chance I can get this Dagger Spine trophy? Right? I mean, you could bring in somebody who like doesn't want the Dagger Spine trophy potentially, but it just creates all these little problems where it's like basically they're not going to be able to get any loot that's worth a flip, probably. I mean, if you're really progressed, I guess they could, if like no one else needs those items anymore. Sure, maybe they can. There's just going to be a lot of situations where it's going to be a feels bad because they're not going to have access to a really cool item that drops just because they're a reserve and they haven't been there every night. Now, I understand the people who've been there clearing stuff, like that's important. And that's good, but it's also important to have reserves. I'm telling you guys, it is massive to have high quality reserves to keep them happy. And pugs. If we have to pug people in there, it's only fair that they get a shot at the item. In my opinion, I've been on the other side of this. In Warlords, when I was trying to, it was like the first or second week, I was trying to clear this heroic last boss. It was really hard. These people pugged me in. I spent 2 or 3 hours on this one boss with them. Every single fight, I was the top of the healing meter by like 20%. I was just destroying the healing meter. There is no way that they would have downed that boss without me. There's no universe they would have done it without me. Now, maybe they find somebody else, maybe, but they didn't. And when we killed the boss, there was a good staff that dropped, and, you know, they had people rolling on it, and then I was just like, they were doing like last call or something. I was like, why can't I roll on that? And they're just like, yeah, man, sorry, that has to go to a guildie. That's a really good item. I was like, the fuck, you didn't tell me that. Like, you didn't tell me that I was not going to get to roll on the item when I just basically carried you guys into doing this boss for the last like 2 or 3 hours, spending all this money on consumables, repair bills, enduring this boot camp like atmosphere. There was definitely some douchebags that were running the show there, and unfortunately there are quite a few guilds that can be like that. Yeah, it was just terrible. And you know, they asked me later, hey, you know, a couple of days later, they're like, hey, do you want to join the guild or whatever? I guess they talked about it. I'd run some dungeons with some of the people from that guild who were actually pretty nice. It wasn't everybody, it was just the leadership was kind of iffy, and I was like, hell no, because they'd screwed me over on that, right? I would have joined them if they would have just said, hey, you know, if you join us, you can roll on this even, or if they wanted to be that way about it. But the nicer thing would just be, just let me roll. Good gesture. I would have, you know, if I got the item, I would have felt really good about it. I would be like, oh man, that's awesome. Thank you guys so much. And then if they asked me, hey dude, we had a really good time running with you. Would you like to join our guild? I might have said yes. I probably would have. And they would have gotten a really good healer at that time. I was one of the top parsing healers on the server, even in like lower gear and some of the other people. But because I was treated like garbage, I was like, no way. So if we have good pugs that come in, you know, and help us out with some of these runs, which we're going to need them early on, there's a chance we could get some good people. If they get a nice piece of loot, they might want to join us and fill in some of these gaps that we have. So it's a really good recruitment option, especially if we don't have all 25 raiders, especially early on. We're still looking for some more people. You know, maybe this person didn't make the 25-man cut. Maybe they were part of the 40-man runs that were going on in vanilla. Their guild cut down to 25. They were the 26th person. They didn't make it, but they're still a good raider. Their guild didn't want any more rogues or warriors or whatever. Or they already had 5 healers, and that's the 6th healer. Or something like that, right? You never know. Or maybe it's just a person who played retail that's just coming back for Burning Crusade, and they have a ton of, you know, mythic raiding experience. They just don't have a guild. or whatever, right? So I just think that you really need to treat the reserves and the pugs right. Yes, it can be a little rough in that scenario, right? For someone who's run Gruul's Lair for 50 runs, and Daggerspine finally drops, for the pug to get the Daggerspine over someone in the guild. Yes, that feels bad in that specific situation. But in the broader conversation of that stuff, it's ultimately, I think, better for the guild to let the reserves and the pugs have a shot at some gear. Like, we can say Daggerspine's hard reserved. In that case, there are some special cases where maybe we can do that, right? But as far as just in general, outside of some limited special circumstances, we need to be open. I think having a gearing system that's open to reserves and pugs having access to some gear, even if we lose the gear, I think it's better for politics. It's just better for the flow of the guild. It's better for recruitment. It's better for all of these things if we are open to that, right? So again, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the loot council, right? It's like, yes, you're losing some mathematical efficiency there by letting some items go or giving them to reserves who are not going to be there raiding every night, but you're gaining you're gaining goodwill, right? You're gaining politics. You're sort of gaining karma, if you want to think about it that way, with other people around. So that's why I don't like DKP, because yes, it does favor veterans. That's good. Screws over reserves, screws over pugs. We're going to need those, especially early on. And it just leads to hoarding and loss of numbers, right? Because everyone just hoards for the best items. So what is the solution then? I think the best solution that I've seen, and I'm going to have to look at the software, but people are running this around, is a soft reserve system. So what this means is that there's even software, there's like an app or an add-on or something you can use with this. Again, I'm going to have to look at the technology, but from what I understand, you are able to reserve one item, sometimes two items. We might go for the two items. That's an item you're targeting that you're interested in. So if that item drops, you are able to roll on that item. If that item does not drop, you do not roll. Okay? So this means there's going to be less competition for certain items. People are incentivized to take items that are not necessarily the biggest ticket items. So, right? So if there's going to be, 5 other people trying to reserve Daggerspine Trophy, but a decent upgrade is going to be like this cloak for you, you could say, you know what? I'm going to target the cloak because there's less people targeting that. Higher chance I'm going to get it if it drops, and just let the other people have the Daggerspine first. Instead of, all 7 hunters rolling on the cloak and all 7 hunters rolling on the Daggerspine Trophy, that can just feel like you have almost no chance to get any loot, right? Versus this, you can specifically target exactly what you need, what's going to help you out the most. And you can play around what other people are doing too, right? So let's say that you come in, and let's say you are a warlock and you've been very industrious, right? And you've already got your 5-piece, right? Your 3 pieces of shadow, your 2 pieces of spell strike. So you don't need any of those. And there's this really good necklace that has a chance to drop, this like Ritzen's pendant or something. It's like 51 shadow damage or something, some crazy ass necklace. It's very good until tier 6. And you're like, you know what? I'm gonna reserve that necklace because I've already got this other gear, right? And then you can have like your other warlock who maybe hasn't completed spell strike yet, and they're kind of struggling for gold a little bit, and they're like, maybe I want to go for the tier 4 warlock and a 2-piece tier 4 instead of the spell strike, right? Then they can go for the helm and the gloves or whatever, right? So it just allows you, based on wherever you are on your gear progression and whatever you're aiming for, you can specifically target what you need. And this helps people out who want to go back and run lower level dungeons. So like in tier 5, if we're doing Serpent Shrine Cavern in the Eye on main raid nights, and then, maybe we try to put together a Gruul run on an off night just for fun, maybe we bring in like 15 of our people and, pug 10 people, maybe that'll bring in one of our really geared people, from Serpent Shrine Cavern. Maybe they'll want to run Gruul because they might have a chance at that Daggerspine Trophy or something else because they can soft reserve it. Maybe just a little piece that they're missing. So that brings geared people back to do the lower level dungeons, Karazhan, Gruul, stuff like that, because then they can kind of soft reserve the pieces they need, and it's going to help us have a much, much better chance of getting high quality pugs. So there might be a pug from one of the best guilds on the server, this guy who's decked out in tier 5, that wants to come in and have this shot at this item in Gruul's or Karazhan. They're likely to come in because of the soft reserve system. Because they get to target that gear they need, and there's a higher chance they're going to get it. So I just think that it's just way better for targeting gear, especially for geared people within the guild and with pugs. It's a lot better than just flat rolling it, because you can have a bit more strategy in those pieces that you're targeting. It doesn't necessarily disadvantage reserves or pugs, because every week is fresh. You just get 2 soft reserves every week. And as more and more people get geared, you have a higher and higher percentage of getting those items that you're targeting. And less people will be rolling for those items over time. They might be targeting some other items. So I just think that you have a lot more control as a player over what you want to target. So I think that's a feels good. You don't have as much people rolling for stuff. So it's more likely if that thing drops, you're going to have a higher chance of getting it, which is definitely a feels good. It's automated. That's going to be awesome. Y'all know sometimes I can struggle a little bit keeping up with stuff, and you know, that type of thing. But because you can run this through an app, we don't have to have like spreadsheets and like keep up with all this DKP stuff, which can be a real pain in the ass to try to track, you know, 30 people if we include common reserves and stuff like that. How much DKP do they have? How much have they spent? Is it going to decay this much every week? You know, all of these other like just paperwork stuff is just, it's probably a pain in the ass to try to manage that. So, you know, being able to just have an app where every week it's fresh and you just go in there and you just check 2 boxes on the items that you want. Everyone can see it, and then it drops. Whatever item drops, we just go check it. We see, did anyone soft reserve it? Yes or no. If no one soft reserved it, you just roll on it. And that way, you know, everyone's getting the gear that wants the gear. They're not hoarding DKP. You know, again, the reserves, the pugs, they feel like it's fair. They get a good shot at some gear, even though they're not there every night. So yes, in those extreme scenarios, like I keep saying, it can suck for veterans, but it's if a big piece drops. But we can look at that. You know, we can reserve some things like Dagger Spine or something else if we really want to. We can talk about that. So we can tinker with it with soft reserve if we want to. We can hard reserve a couple of things and loot counsel it or whatever if we need to. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good idea, but I'm saying that that is at least theoretically possible with this system. So I just think that it's the most flexible. It gives people the most control over which gear they want. It attracts high quality pugs. It helps retain high quality reserves. It's just going to be the best overall. Yes, for veterans, it can suck, but if you're fully committed to it, if you're really a veteran, if you're really looking out for what's best in the guild and not just, you know, wanting to hoard your DKP and get the best item you possibly can because you're there literally every single night saving every single ounce of DKP for whatever your best item is, if you can put that aside, I think that this is going to be the best system. So we can talk about it some more if you guys have heard of different things, but I think that overall this is going to be what I would prefer to do, and I think this is the best one. You also have GDKP, but I don't think anyone wants that for like a serious guild thing where it's just basically whoever has the most gold just buys all the items that they want that's useful. I don't like that. I would like for people that are kind of struggling with money, that are at least coming in with the consumables and stuff like that. I want them to have a fair shot at it. So anyways, okay, well, that's going to be it for this video. So it's definitely a lot longer than I thought it would be, as usual. But I just wanted to go over some of these things in depth. I do want to show you guys these resources here real quick at the end of the video. So I really love this site, wowtbc.gg. It has a lot of things you can use. So if you go to BIS lists, it has every single class and different spec you can use. And it'll tell you pre-raid BIS, tier 4, and tier 5. And it gives you a bunch of options. It tells you where you can get it, and it tells you the percentage drop rate. So now, it isn't 100% right all the time, especially about trinkets, I think, but it's pretty damn close. So it'll give you some ideas about what to get. So for example, White Men Hood, best pre-raid BIS for Resto Druid, but if you can't afford that, if it's just way too expensive early on, you can say, okay, the Gladiator one's pretty good, but here we go. We can get Hallowed Crown from Arcatraz. So that could be pretty good. Overall, you can look at the stats on that. 16% chance drop rate from this person. You got a BOE pattern. You could potentially buy off the auction house, Primal Hood of Life. You have this set, this Moonglade set that you can get from Botanica. So this is just awesome. It tells you, you know, all of your choices. So again, if you can't quite afford the literal pre-raid bis, then this gives you, you know, a bunch of different things that you could go for instead, that you can get from dungeons or heroics or reputation or whatever. It's nice. Go into tier 4. It's going to tell you, you know, these different tier 4 setups. So it's got the White Man Hood, and then it goes over to Crown of Morlorn. And so on and so forth. So you guys get the gist of it. So I think that's really helpful. Ribbon of Sacrifice is Troll. Do not get that on Resto Druid. We'll talk about that because that only works with direct heals, the on-use one. So that's what I'm talking about. Some of the stuff's a little off. I think most people would say the best is Essence of Martyr, Lower City Praybook, or Scarab of the Infinite Cycle. But nevertheless, it's very good. It's really helpful. And then it also has a talent calculator if you want that. I know a lot of sites have talent calculators. That's cool. Has a PvE guide, so if you just want to know like some very basic stuff, it's just got one quick page here. Tells you consumables. Look at that, brilliant. Mana oil, like I mentioned before, that's an old school oil that's going to be better than superior mana oils. This is 14 mana per 5. This is 12 mana per 5, but also gives you 25 healing. It's better. So the vanilla, you know, classic WoW version is better. Then it has even those runes I mentioned, right? Dark rune or demonic rune. Those are great. So it's got you covered. It tells you the food that you need, gives you some alternatives. You can use this flask, or you can use these different elixirs. So it's got you hooked up. It's a really good site. Tells you lots of things. Even has bookmarks where you can go down. So I'm not sponsored by them or anything. It's just a resource I've come across before that I thought was super useful. It does have boss guides for like Karazhan. So we'll go over this in the Discord. We can talk through it. But if you want to read through these or find a YouTube video that talks about some of these fights, just so you can kind of get a sense of like what's going on. This is so simple. It's just one nice, like just a couple of paragraphs, even bullet points that just exactly explains, you know, what you need for some of these fights. So especially on like some of these that aren't like super flexible, where there's a bunch of different strategies and it's really complex, but it's very straightforward, like some of the fights in Karazhan. That's really good. Another resource I'll mention, then we'll go ahead and call it a day. I do not want this to be over an hour. Is Elitist Jerks. Just go to Elitist Jerks resources. Just type that into Google. Get here. This is some deep theory crafting. If you really want to know your class and you really want to be a baller, this is a lot more text heavy. I recommend checking this out though if you really want to be the best you can be. Click on the link. Now some of these are better than others, the way that they're written and the examples they give. But I'll show you the Druid one's just fantastic here. It kind of walks through the spells, gives you some of the math, gives you the formula. It'll tell you exactly when to do some of these different spells. Tells you talents. 5-second rule explains exactly what that is and why it matters for healers. Gives you stat priority here, why that matters. Talks about bonus healing. Talks about spell haste, how useful that is at different breakpoints. Now, this one I thought was super helpful, not just for healers, but for everybody, is what is the conversion rate of spirit to mana per 5? So this says, you know, if you have 400 spirit, 10 additional points of intellect will give you this much mana per 5. Or if you have 400 intellect, 10 additional points of spirit will give you 3.7 mana per 5. So it's going to give you some ballpark numbers to kind of go by. It's like, okay, I have 500 intellect, it's about 4 mana per 5. You know, every 10 points of spirits. That can help you kind of figure out gear calculations and runes and things like that, trinkets. So that's just super helpful. And then they walk you through the set bonuses, which ones are good or not. Tree of Life, is it good or not? Rolling Life Bloom, a very specific mechanic for druids, which are really important. What are some different things you might be doing in raids? What would it be like? And then they kind of walk you through in depth on some of the trinkets. They have different consumables here, different idols and different situations they might be good in. Trinkets, different types of trinkets, passive plus healing, non-spirit regen, spirit regen, clickable heal, explains the situations where you might want different trinkets. So it's just awesome. So this, if you want depth, Elitist Jerks is absolutely the place to go. So if you just want kind of a cursory, like just TLDR version, I think TBC is great. And if you want like loot recommendations and how to gear up your character, I think that's great. Because once again, it tells you exactly where to get drop rates, all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's going to be it. Let me know what you think in the comments, or you can email me, thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com if you have any ideas, or you can talk to me in the game itself. But hopefully this kind of clarifies what I'm thinking about for rating. Hopefully most people are on board with this. Let me know if you have questions or concerns, and otherwise, we'll see everyone next time. Have a great day.